All right, everyone, it's time for a reminder that the Donald Trump incarnation of the Supreme Court is the most meaningful that the United States has arguably had in the better part of a century. So thank you to Donald Trump, really bringing the heat with the 3 Supreme Court justices that he managed to put on the bench. I'd like to talk about some of the decisions, the meaning behind them, because I don't always agree with 100% of the nuance behind decisions, or maybe the pragmatic fallout in some cases, but that doesn't mean that they're wrong decisions. The court really shouldn't be looking at pragmatism at all, although historically speaking, it definitely does. I would have one other bone to pick. I'm on Team Razor Force on this one. The judiciary is too powerful. It does engage in activism. It doesn't really matter if it's left-wing or right-wing. The court oscillates back and forth, partially on the political tides and based on how old justices of various persuasions are. It would be nice if that genie could be put back in the bottle. It won't be, though. That's wishful thinking. Looking at some of the cases we've had over only the last couple of years, though, really it's amazing how impactful the Supreme Court really has been. You have affirmative action, at least for college enrollment, now ending, which is a good thing. I fully support that decision. They didn't extend it to military academies, and it doesn't extend to, federally funded grant or monopoly-related businesses granted latitude by the government. It probably should have gone further than that, but it's a 9 out of 10 decision. It was a good idea. Think about the impact that this has. Affirmative action in education has been the law of the land for many, many decades. And it was never meant to be permanent, number one. This was pointed out by John Roberts in his concurring opinion. It was never constitutional. It violates the 14th Amendment. SCOTUS finally had the balls to determine that to be the case. It was upheld by lower courts inexplicably despite its explicitly discriminatory basis, and the idea was, well, all animals are created equal, but some are more equal than others. It's like something out of fucking Animal Farm. The idea was that it was okay to hold somebody back, at least potentially, on paper to hold somebody back based on the color of their skin because, well, the college would rather have this other person with a different skin color. The irony is that people who are screeching about it right now, and trust me, the leftoids are still salty about the decision. They will be for a number of weeks before they finally tucker themselves out and slip into a Gatorade coma, a Pabst coma. The irony is that what they worry about is discrimination, but that was already happening. The idea that a bunch of woke colleges are going to engage in discrimination and just have a bunch of white kids there anyway is completely laughable. Even for optics purposes, they're at least going to try to work around the end of affirmative action to institute effectively the same thing. Worries about, well, the colleges will get more white and more Asian. Well, firstly, who cares? Do you have a problem with white and Asian people? I think some of them do. Of course, Asians of a light skin tone have now been rendered a model minority by the NIMBY left, the white liberals. They no longer recognize them as BIPOC, which is interesting. So if you're from Japan or something, they have a problem with you. I wonder how they explain Indian Americans who, by and large, per capita, have the most wealth of any group in the United States. Well, the average person from India is not exactly made of porcelain, now are they? Somehow they've escaped the... congrats to Hindu people. You've escaped model minority denigrated status among leftoids. Affirmative action should have been dead long ago. It took the Trump incarnation of the Supreme Court to finally put the last nail in its coffin and say, enough of this horse shit. We've got student loan debt. Effectively, the Supreme Court the other day simply reaffirming what is constitutionally the case, which is that Congress controls the purse strings. The House of Representatives specifically makes budgets. The executive branch can't unilaterally say, yeah, you know what, we're going to make $400 billion materialize out of thin air and give it to people who sign promissory notes, who are not making their loan payments in some cases. We're going to give arbitrary amounts of money to people based on circumstances that in many cases don't even represent the circumstances under which they took out the loan. So, somebody was wealthy when they took out student loans. Their family was wealthy. They didn't get Pell or anything like that. But now they're eating ramen. Well, too bad for you. Because you didn't get Pell, you only qualify for 10 grand of student loan relief, not 20, even though you may be on a sinking ship fiscally. By the way, there's no attempt to bring back student loan bankruptcies, which is about the only methodology that would make sense to take care of the problem. That was eliminated by Obama years ago. Hey, who's Obama? Oh, you mean Joe Biden's former boss? I wonder why he's not pushing for that. Or you could end up just above the threshold. You did take Pell. You were poor when you took out your student loans. Now you finally made it, but you make just a little bit too much, so you get absolutely nothing. There's not even a sliding scale in the original Biden proposal for the student loan debt relief. At first, I think they were trying to make it partially race-based, too. They did that with farm aid and aid for restaurants. Both of those ruled unconstitutional. The federal court level, and were never appealed, by the way, upwards by the Biden admin because they knew better. It never made sense. People who never went to college, they make a little bit too much money. You know, some freelancer with their own truck, some person who sells ice cream, a dude who does freelance plumbing, are expected to pay for the student loans of somebody who now makes a couple tens of thousands of dollars more than that individual because they went to school. It never made sense. It was never constitutional. And by the way, I would like to point out that Joe Biden never intended to institute student loan debt relief. Their Democrats are going to use this as a campaign issue in 2024. You're never going to get it. They have absolutely no reason to push for it. They want you to be in debt. It makes you easier to control. It was just an issue for the election. They held it over your head and millions of people fell for the grift. What about Roe v. Wade? Now here's a decision on which the pragmatic fallout I don't always agree with. I believe that abortion should be legal. I am pro-choice up and at least through the first trimester, with an additional exception if the woman's life is in danger thereafter, like as in, she is going to die unless we perform the abortion. Yeah, she's at 14 weeks, the baby's not viable, but she will die. We can establish that. Accredited licensed physicians have determined that if she continues the pregnancy, she's going to have massive organ failure. Well, the fetus ain't going to live anyway, and you're basically giving the death sentence to the mother. I believe in that, but it's a states' rights issue. The problem with Roe v. Wade is that it effectively created a new constitutional right out of thin air when it was first passed back in the 1970s. All the current court did is reevaluate the situation, say, hey, the court can't do that, and then return it to the states. Now, SCOTUS is blameless in what subsequently happened with the Republican Party. The second Roe v. Wade ended, what did the morons do? Lindsey Graham came out, well, I think we need a federal abortion ban, and so on forth. It's funny how the states' rights argument immediately became a federal argument, according to some Republicans, right before the election. I have a feeling that some of them were in on the grift, along with Kevin McCarthy, Ronna McDaniels, and many others who deliberately threw their own candidates under the bus, especially in 2022, just because they didn't want more MAGA in Congress. And they tried then to blame them for bad election results when it was literally and objectively their own fault due to misappropriating money, refusing to proxy up for candidates who were on the edge of viability, etc., etc. Blake Masters calling, Herschel Walker calling, and many, many other such cases. They tried to get rid of Lexalt, but and then Vance and a few others as well. As far as the decision, it was correct. It's just that the pragmatic fallout thereafter has led some states to effectively ban abortion. But it is a states' rights issue. At that point, you need additional court cases to determine whether it's also an issue of equal protection, etc., etc. But as far as Roe v. Wade, Trump is correct when he evaluates this. You couldn't even have that conversation so long as Roe v. Wade existed. What some states were doing, and the left pushed the issue. It wasn't the right wing that brought up Dobbs. It was brought up by the left. They pushed the envelope with the Virginia decision under Northam, etc., to allow abortion up through the end of the third trimester. So basically, as long as the baby hasn't been physically born, you can have an abortion. Even if the person is literally delivering at that time. The baby hasn't crowned yet, you can go ahead and kill it. That's gruesome. 99% of the population does not agree with that. The left overstretched, they then brought up a bunch of court cases and they lost. They're the ones responsible for having done so. I think the most impactful decision overall, though, is Bruen. The Bruen decision with regards to New York and New Jersey, I believe it was, in their carry permitting process. Effectively, they had banned the ability to carry a firearm in a concealed manner. Well, quite clearly, the founders did intend for you to be able to carry a pistol in your waistcoat, because they did so all the time. Virtually everyone was armed. If they were male, if they were of militia age back in the late 1700s, everyone was carrying. Because there were hostile so-called native forces, dangerous animals, the constant risk of attack by highwaymen and shit like that. Of course they were armed at all times. They were armed to the teeth, and by the way, they loved it. They thought that guns were fun. Many people believe that now as well. They didn't shoot up schools with them, though. Unless, 100 years later, unless it was a Native American school. There are plenty of school shootings there, normally carried out by the U.S. military, if not necessarily by the militia. The Klan was involved. By the way, the Klan's the sponsors of Crookshank, which was finally killed by Bruen. It had been lingering for some time in the wake of McDonald v. Chicago and Heller versus D.C. In those senses, and in other cases as well, you do have a number of others, but in brief, those are, I think, the most important ones. You now have the most impactful and proper Supreme Court you've had in living memory. Thank you, Donald Trump, because without you, the swing justice is John Roberts, a fickle liberal appointed by George W., who half the time doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. You look at the Obamacare decision, for example. 5-4, Obamacare's fine, as long as we call it a tax. Yeah, it's 40,000 pages long and mostly not related to its mandate, but just because the mandate exists, well, the government's created a tax, a conditional tax. Well, it's perfectly constitutional. I'd love to see them revisit that decision. Maybe if Trump gets a second term and maybe one of the other libshits on the Supreme Court bench dies and Trump gets to replace them, I hope they revisit the legality of the Obamacare mandate, which is reinstituted, by the way, as a tax on the super poor by Joe Biden. Again, Bidenomics, really a wonderful thing. Thank you, Donald Trump. That's about all. Peace out.